Thanksgiving has never been my favorite holiday. I mean, I love the food and all, but the whole forced family reunion thing, it gets old. This year, though, I had a bad feeling about going back home. I couldn't quite explain it. It wasn't like anything had happened, but I had this knot in my stomach from the moment I got the invitation from my mom. Still, it was Thanksgiving, and avoiding family wasn't really an option, so I drove down from Chicago to my parents' house in this small Indiana town, the kind where everybody still knows your name, even if you haven't lived there in years. It was about a 3-hour drive, nothing major, but by the time I arrived, it was already dark. Their house hadn't changed a bit. Same squeaky porch, same faded American flag hanging from the post. I half expected my dad to come out and yell at me for being late, but instead, the door swung open before I even knocked. "Logan, you're finally here." My mom gave me one of her bone-crushing hugs. It was warm, familiar, but it felt a little more desperate than usual. I didn't think much of it at the time. Inside, my sister Emma was sitting on the couch, rocking her newborn, Tyler. She looked exhausted. Parenting had clearly taken its toll, but she smiled weakly at me. "Hey, big brother." "Hey, Em. How's the little guy?" I asked, kneeling down to get a closer look at Tyler, who was fidgeting and letting out tiny, frustrated squeals. Emma sighed, colicky as always. Dinner went by like usual. Turkey, mashed potatoes, all the classic dishes. The conversation was the same too. Dad griping about politics, Mom asking if I had found a nice girl yet, Emma trying to stay awake while feeding Tyler. But something felt off. It wasn't the food, and it wasn't just the usual awkwardness of family dinners. There was this tension in the air that none of us were addressing. My mom seemed jumpy, her eyes flicking toward the window every few minutes, and Emma, who's normally pretty chatty, kept to herself, barely touching her plate. After we finished, Dad asked me to help him with something in the garage. It was cold out there, the air biting. He lit up a cigarette, something he rarely does anymore. That's when I knew something was bothering him. "Listen, Logan, there's been some stuff going on around here," he started, staring down at the cigarette like he wished it would say the words for him. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning against the workbench. "Last week, someone broke into the Thompsons' house down the road. Didn't take anything, just messed with their stuff, left their front door wide open, scared the hell out of them. Cops came, but they didn't find anyone. Just some footprints in the yard." "Okay," I said slowly, waiting for him to get to the point. "And last night," he continued, "someone was walking around outside. I thought it was just the neighbor's kid. You know, screwing around, but I don't think it was. It was late, like 2 a.m., and I saw this guy standing out by the fence. I couldn't make out his face, but he was just standing there, staring at the house. That uneasy feeling in my stomach tightened." "Did you call the cops?" Dad took a long drag on his cigarette. "Yeah, but by the time they got here, he was gone. No footprints this time. Nothing." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. Was my dad just being paranoid, or was something really going on? Either way, it wasn't sitting right with me. We went back inside, and I tried to shake the feeling, but my mind was racing. The house suddenly felt smaller, more claustrophobic, and the silence around us was heavier than before. By the time it hit 10 p.m., Emma had gone to bed, taking Tyler with her. My parents insisted I stay the night, which was odd since I usually drove back after dinner, but my mom looked at me with these pleading eyes, and for some reason I didn't argue. I agreed to crash on the couch in the living room. I laid there in the dark, the soft glow of the streetlight barely seeping through the curtains. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as the heat kicked on. I was about to drift off when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. My heart started racing, my breath catching in my throat. I sat up, straining to listen. There it was again, the crunch of gravel, like someone was walking along the side of the house. I grabbed my phone and quietly texted Emma, "You awake? Someone's outside." No response. The footsteps circled the house, and I could hear the floor creak as my dad got out of bed and made his way to the front door. He didn't turn on any lights, didn't say a word, just peeked through the peephole, his back tensing. I crept over to him, my heart in my throat. "Do you see anything?" I whispered. He shook his head slowly, but the look on his face said otherwise. He motioned for me to check the back door. I crept toward the kitchen, my feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. When I reached the door, I flipped the lock, double-checking it was secure, then peeked through the small window in the door. I froze. There, standing just beyond the glow of the porch light, was a man. I couldn't see his face. He had a hood pulled up, shadowing his features. But I could see his breath in the cold air. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, watching. I backed away slowly, not wanting to make any noise. My mind was racing. What was he doing? Why hadn't he knocked or tried to break in? Just as I was about to call out to my dad, I heard a knock on the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I rushed back to the living room where my dad was still standing by the door, frozen. He held up a hand, signaling for me to stay quiet. We waited, our breaths shallow, but the knock didn't come again. After what felt like an eternity, my dad cautiously opened the curtain to look outside. The man was gone. The next morning, we checked the yard, but there were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there at all. The whole thing felt like a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. Something about that man's presence, the way he just stood there, it stuck with me. I left after breakfast, telling my parents I'd be back soon, but deep down I knew I wouldn't. Not for a long time anyway.